Alrighty. Good morning, everybody. Let me introduce myself again. I am Hannah Plumpton. I am the upland game bird biologist here in North Carolina. So I am in charge of monitoring and managing all the wild turkey, ruffed grouse, bobwhite quail, and the occasional pheasant. So that is my job, and we're going to discuss today a little bit about some of our game birds and their biology. And while that may seem a little odd for those who don't do a lot of hunting, you find out the more you know about the birds and their life cycle, the better hunter you will have because you know the birds and what they're going to be doing. So we're going to start off first with our northern bobwhites. We have 6 species of quail here in North America. They are the Gambel's quail, our mountain quail, Montezuma quail, California quail, scale quail, and of course the bobwhites. We only have one here in North Carolina, and actually one east of the Mississippi, and that is our bobwhites. So as you can see, they actually have the widest range out of all our quail. They range, down into Mexico, part of the Caribbean, through the Midwest, and up through the mid-central area. That map along the edges isn't accurate. Pennsylvania does not have quail currently, but they're hoping to actually translocate quail there starting this coming spring, so that'll be a new exciting adventure for them. But as you can see, we have bobwhites all in North Carolina. So bobwhites are a small bird. They're larger than a robin, but smaller than a crow, so kind of blue jay size. They're small rounded birds, small head, stubby rounded wings, short tail. Our males have that black and white striped face with that white throat and a chestnut body. Our females are duller like many females. They got that speckled buffy brown body, the buffy throat, and that buffy stripe over the eye. So where we find these birds is typically in grasslands and rangelands, or if we're in the Midwest. But here they prefer grasslands. These are areas with lots of bare ground, lots of forbs, or what we think of broadleaf plants, and with some shrubs for cover. So as a biologist, when I tell people what sort of good habitat for quail, we say 30% should be bare ground, 30% should be grasses, 30% should be the forbs, and the remaining 10% is shrub cover, ideally. That's a good, quick and easy method. If you want to go higher on the forbs, you can't go wrong with that. You can find them in open woodlands and pine savannas as well as agricultural areas. You can find them, and depending on the habitat, they may be doing well there or they may be just persisting there. But that's important to keep in mind, their preferred habitat, and I'll kind of tee in why. But let's take a couple pictures of them. So if I'm blocking people's way, please let me know. But we have, some open woodlands with lots of sunlight hitting the ground, lots of cover. If you are into forestry, we say a maximum of 40 basal area per acre. So we are talking at a maximum, preferably closer to the 20. So we like lots of sunlight hitting that ground, stimulating growth and having a good understory for those quail. They'll like those nice field edges. Typically, I tell people if you're going around and you see things, they're weedy, they're overgrown, and you're kind of twitchy and kind of want to cringe at those areas, those are great quail habitat places. Overgrown fields that we forgot to touch, or a food plot we forgot to hit and it grows up weedy and bare grounds, those are great quail habitat areas. So quail, I don't know if you know this, lots of things like to eat quail. So as a regard, they tend to spend most of their time in flocks, in groups, safety in number, other than when they're in their breeding. So because they spend their time in flocks, they spend most of their time looking for food, head down. Somebody's got to head up looking for predators. They eat primarily a lot of seeds. These are ragweed seeds. Ragweed, if you grow ragweed, wildlife love ragweed, including quail. Grass seeds, pine seeds, small acorns. They aren't gonna swallow those honking ones. But if you got something small like pin oak or scarlet oak, they'll take those. Legumes, insects, berries, things we would think. And in the springtime and summer, chicks feed primarily on insects. So insects are very important. Chicks, they're doing a lot of growing in their first couple of weeks. They're growing double, triple their size. They're growing multiple sets of feathers, so they need that high protein diet that insects are. And most insects are found heavily around our forbs, or those broadleaf plants. So that's why those are so important, is they're a great food source for adults and in our chicks. So in the fall and winter, they spend their time in those flocks or groups, and we call those coveys. And unusually, these birds actually will roost on the ground, making them very vulnerable to predation. So they face in a circle like this picture, where they all sit outward to help keep them warm at night, but also to help keep an eye out for predators, so they're all looking out for their buddy. In the springtime, they'll do fights for their mates, as well as perform a courtship display. And then we roll into nesting with that, and they'll nest in some dense vegetation on the ground. They'll scrape a shallow depression, line it with some leaves and grasses, weave a nice little arch over it so they can get into it, and they can't be seen from above. And they'll lay about 12 to 16 eggs. They'll incubate a little over 3 weeks at 23 to 24 days. And then our young are born precocial, so they're like chickens. They're born with their eyes open, they're fluffy down, and they're ready to walk within an hour of being hatched. This is important because if everything eats an adult quail, everything eats a chick. And I like to think of our chicks as tiny little cotton balls on toothpicks. So a really good way to think about it is they can't walk through grasses, and they have trouble with that. So that's where bare ground is especially helpful. And even our adults, they can't dig through things. They're very shallow diggers, so they're looking for seeds on the surface. So if you have a matte layer of grass and the seeds are at the bottom, they're not getting those seeds. So a great way to really know if a good area is good for quail is if you lay on your stomach and go, okay, can my fingers and hands walk through this easily? If it can, you're looking at good quail habitat. If it's a mat, like a pasture, and you look down and you're like, well, I can't move 2 inches in this. They're not moving it either. So that kind of brings us as an overall conclusion to our quail. So we'll go into my other upland game bird species of the ruffed grouse. So ruffed grouse are a little bit larger than our quail. They're closer to crow size. They're intricately barred and spotted plumage. It ranges based off of where they're at, but they can be a grayish brown, reddish brown, or tawny brown, depending on their habitat. Here in North Carolina, they tend to be more this tawny brown color. And they get their name from these ruffed feathers on their necks that can be brown or black. And the males will poof these feathers up during their courtship display or their territorial defense. And I'll show you some pictures of them being roughed up a little bit later. So, ruffed grouse are the widest ranging upland game bird species in North America. They're found in the West Coast, down the Rockies, up through Canada into Alaska, over the Northwest Territories, across Canada, and work their way down the Appalachian all the way into Georgia. So they're a wide-ranging bird and a wide-ranging habitat. Here in North Carolina, they are found in our mountain counties. They are typically not found in elevations below 2,000 feet elevation. You can find them in pockets, but primarily they're going to be above that 2,000 feet elevation. So here's a nice picture of those ruffed feathers all out, so where it gets its name. So their wintering and foraging habitat are young forests. And this is forests that are 5 to 20 years of age. So if you cut a forest and have a clear cut, 5 years later is just beginning into grouse habitat, all the way to 20 years. Those are those thick stands of saplings that you can't move 2 inches in. Nesting habitat is in these young forests as well, but they're a little older, so there's a little bit more ground homes and a little bit more space on that ground. They nest on the ground, and this is typically under or against a log or a stump or against a tree, somewhere where they have one side is protected for them from predators, because when they're on the ground nesting, they're extremely vulnerable to predation. And our brood habitat, or that young grouse habitat for our babies, is areas where there's that high herbaceous ground cover, where there's a lot of plants in the understory where they can find food. So some habitat of that is, we'll see often these mountain laurels and rhododendron streams in the winter times in the mountains. That's often a lot of times the only shelter they have in the winter time. The upper right corner we have those is a great brood habitat. There's a lot of green things, young cover and food sources for chicks. In the bottom left, we have those thick stands of saplings and down logs is great spring territory, as well as mate attractions areas, as well as just general. And then in the bottom right is great grouse habitat. We have a thick wall of saplings in the understory with some oaks in the overstory to provide food sources. So they have cover from hawks, which is their main predator, and raptors, but they still can get food easily without exposing themselves. So grouse can eat a little bit more heavy-duty food than our quail can, so they tend to eat a little bit more in our leaves, the buds and fruits. These are fern buds, little buds of trees off of shrubs and other woody plants. They eat a lot of acorns in the winter here, as well as the mountain laurel and greenbrier berries. Like the quail, the chicks eat primarily insects, that high-protein diet that they need as they grow several feathers and twice their size in a few weeks. So that high protein is extremely necessary. So, grouse are primarily solitary throughout the entire year. They come briefly together for breeding, and then they go their own separate ways. Males in the springtime defend their territories and attract mates by doing what we call drumming. They stand on a down log, a stump, or a rock. The down log's typically at least 12 inches in diameter. And they do what we call drumming, where they cup air under their wings to create a sound which sounds like you're starting an engine, typically. This male is in a lovely display mode, as he's got his tail fanned, his feathers rough, ready to attract a female or defend his spots. So we'll see if we can get this, but this is a video of a grouse drumming in the springtime. So I know you can't hear it, but it starts off very slow and then it rapidly picks up, which helps differentiate between like a woodpecker, which is consistent throughout. This is a great spot for him. He's got a down log. He's got a lot of saplings all around him, lots of cover, because when he's drumming, he's telling all the males, all the females, here I am, but he's also telling every predator, here I am, come eat me. So, ruffed grouse will nest again on the ground in a hollow-out depression in the leaf litter, typically at a base of a tree or a rock. They have 8 to 14 eggs. They incubate a bit longer than our quail at 24 to 26 days, so about 3.5 weeks. Again, their young are born precocial, so they're up and moving within an hour. And then these guys will begin to make short little flights by like 2 or 3 feet after 5 days. So again, they're extremely vulnerable. Everything wants to eat them. The faster they can be up and moving, the better for them. So that brings us to the last bird we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about right now, is the American woodcock. Now, I don't personally manage these. My counterpart, Doug Howell, who is our migratory game bird coordinator. I like to say I handle turkey, grouse, quail, and pheasant, and any other bird that we shoot, go to Doug. So we'll start with American woodcock. I'm not as familiar with them, so you'll probably can tell that. But they are a plumped, short-legged, they're a shorebird, categorized as a shorebird, with a long, straight bill. They have these really large heads. They have a short and practically non-existent neck and short, stubby tails. A good way to see them apart is this bright cinnamon belly and breast, as well as that gray collar between their head and their wings. So they are the only woodcock species found in North America, and they're found primarily east of the Mississippi. They can be found year-round here in North Carolina, but we're also a major area for them during migration as they pass from lower below to go up to the northeast, Midwest, and southern Canada for breeding. So where do we find them? We find them in moist forested areas. There's young shrubby forest, deciduous forest, where it's wet meadows with young woodlands, anywhere where it's hard to get to them, and bushwhack too is where you're going to find them because nobody else can get to them either. So you'll see them sometimes also in those open string swamp areas with thickets, old fields and clearings. They're going to be areas where they can get food and be protected. Those are where they're going to be. Unfortunately, those are a pain to get to. So some nice areas of those are here. You can see there's a lot of cover. There's a lot of thick stands, a pain to walk through. You're not getting through them very fast. It's wet, it's moist. There's either that or there's an old field next to it with some moisture. These have a lot of silky dogwoods, which are a great indicator of wet areas. They like to keep their feet wet, so that's a good area for them. So why they need this wet soil is because they probe the soil with their long bills looking for their food, and their primary food source is earthworms. They'll eat other invertebrates found in the soil, such as snails, millipedes, and spiders, but probably about 90% of their diet is earthworms. And if you see them, you may often see, or videos of them, you'll often see them kind of rocking back and forth like they're jamming out. This is believed that this rocking shifts the ground and the pressure in the ground, which may prompt the earthworms to move and making them easier for the woodcocks to detect them and feed on them. They'll also eat tiny amounts of plants. These are sedges, also other plants, young plants that are who like their feet wet. So unlike grouse and quail, woodcock are actually nocturnal. They do most of their foraging at night. They are generally solitary like the ruffed grouse outside of the nesting season, though they may occasionally be found in small groups of 2 to 4. Males actually have a really cool courtship display that they do at dawn and dusk in the springtime. They'll find a meadow or a brushy field, and then they do kind of a buzzy peep, peep call, and then they go fly 200 to 400 feet up, doing a twisty flight where the wind goes through their feathers, creating a whispering sound as they whirl back to the ground and do another peep, peep call. So that's always fun to listen to and hear. They also nest on the ground in areas with lots of dead leaves and cover. They have the scrape on the ground lined with dead leaves. They lay anywhere from 1 to 5 eggs, but typically 4. They incubate a little less than our quail. They about 20 to 22 days, so just about 3 weeks. Again, their young is precocial. Unlike our grouse and quail, the female will actually feed her young for the first couple of days, and then they're off on their own, probing for their own food. They can do short flights as young as 1 to 2 weeks, and then they're completely independent by themselves after 5 weeks of age. So they do a whole lot of growing very quickly. So that was kind of the quick and dirty, broad strokes life cycle of 3 species. So I'm going to do a couple of plugs, more information on these birds. We are on our website. This is the main homepage. You can go on that tab. It's a hunting tab. You pull down, it gives you where to hunt, what to hunt, when to hunt. It also has a fun thing all the way at the bottom, which is learning and resources. And this is my shameless plug, is if you go out hunting grouse or you go out hunting wild quail, please sign up to be an avid hunter, or rabbits. I will pull out rabbits. But we have conducted these surveys since 1984, and they're a massive way how I track what the grouse and quail numbers are. We ask that you go out and tell us how many hours you hunted, how many people you went hunting, what county did you hunt, how many grouse or quail coveys did you flush, how many did you harvest, and was it on private or game lands? That's all I want to know. You fill out the card, even if it's all zeros, and you went once, you mail it back, and then that following fall, I bribe you, and I send you a blaze orange hat and a report that summarizes all the things that you have done and all your other avid hunters have done. So, positive reinforcement. So, it's really important to me to help that. That's one of the massive ways how I monitor grouse and quail populations. So that's my shameless plug, and I want to thank you for your time.